So it is my great pleasure to introduce Alexandra. I contacted a friend of mine, and maybe a friend of yours, Ann Summers Hogue, who was a longtime Island member, was on our board, just a fabulous person at the Clayton Christensen Institute. And I was telling her what Amy and I were up to, and Design for Dignity was a question, not a statement. You heard that yesterday. And she said, I had to connect with Alexandra because her work is dignity. And it is. So I am happy to bring up to the stage Alexandra. Yes.
Hi, everybody. I am really excited to be here, and so many thanks to Chris for giving me this opportunity to reflect on my work, frankly, from a somewhat different perspective than I usually use, which is the dignity perspective. Before I launch into my talk, I did want to just reflect for a minute on some of the great conversations from yesterday, where Kate talked about design principles, and Liz and Amy talked about dignity in very different ways. And I think you'll hear some of those themes echoed in what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll give you 30 seconds about who I am. I had a long and varied career in healthcare. And about 10 years ago, I got very interested in social drivers of health, SDOH, which I know many in this room are familiar with. And specifically, what are healthcare organizations doing to try to improve housing or food insecurity to improve the health of their members? And I look at it from a couple of different perspectives. One is what's working that we can replicate, and the other is what's maybe not working quite as well that we can do better. I'm also an executive fellow at Harvard Business School's Social Enterprise Initiative, and the significance of that is that we have a systems change agenda. And you may wonder what that is, and we're still trying to figure that out. But as a result of that, and doing a lot of reading and talking to a lot of people, I've done a lot of thinking about systems change, and it can be kind of discouraging, right? Housing, healthcare, we've got a lot of really broken systems in this country, and when they all come together, it can be really overwhelming. And social drivers of health are rooted in a lot of those systems, and particularly the health inequities that are a result of the systems. However, I'm a basically optimistic person, and so I do look for areas of bright spots. I've heard a few yesterday from some of you, and I'm sure there are many more. And what I'm going to try to do today is using the perspective of healthcare, trying to improve housing specifically, and thinking about how we can integrate systems thinking and design thinking to improve health. So I'll spend just a couple of minutes on some frameworks and then launch into the stories, which will probably be the best part. This visual comes from Lauren Taylor, who is one of the really interesting thinkers in SDOH. And she outlines 4 pathways by which housing affects health. And by the way, you'll get a copy of all these slides. There is some detail that I'll warn you right now you won't be able to see, but there's not only copies of the slides, but a lot of references in the last slide. So that will all be coming your way. So the 4 pathways, which come from a big literature review, are also kind of intuitive, and you'll see why I say that. The first one is stability, or instability, meaning you're homeless or you're couch surfing, or imagine what it would feel like not to really know where you're going to sleep tonight or tomorrow night or how you're going to shelter your kids. That is well documented to create a lot of mental and physical health issues. Safety and quality really relates to the environmental factors in your housing. Is there mold? Is there dust? Are there issues that will aggravate asthma and send you to the emergency room? During COVID, crowded conditions were a huge driver of contagion, as we all know. Affordability is the third pathway. It's no surprise that we have a huge housing crisis in this country. I was shocked to read that 42 million households in this country, or a third of the households in this country, are cost burdened, which means they're paying 30% or sometimes much more of their income for housing. And that affects health because spending all your money on housing crowds out spending on healthcare or nutrition or other things that affect your health. And the final pathway is neighborhood. And one of the stories I'm going to tell you relates to neighborhood. But just to tee that up, neighborhood affects, can you go outside and walk? Can your kids go outside and play? Do you have access to healthy food? And so on and so forth. So here's the first unreadable slide. And The point of this slide is that it's unreadable. This is a actually somewhat simplified systems map that shows how housing, the 4 blue boxes in the corner, are kind of similar to the 4 pathways, and the yellow blobs are housing, and you can see their arrows going like every which way. So deciphering this is pretty hard, but this is the system that we have to deal with whether we want to or not. So how can we do that? How can we connect systems and make them more systematic for people? And the answer that I'm going to propose is by combining systems thinking and design thinking. So what do I mean by that? Systems thinking really relates to going to the level of the person or the group that you are interested in helping and thinking about what's the ecosystem for them? What are the barriers that are facing them and preventing them from being healthy, and what are the systems behind those barriers? If we map the system from the participant's perspective, it becomes somewhat more manageable. And if we think about what are the direct forces that are affecting their health, that gives us a lever and a starting point. But how do we understand it from their perspective? Well, everybody in this room knows the answer. Ask the people. And I'm saying it even though it's really obvious, because in healthcare, where I came from, it's not obvious at all. And I've studied a lot of programs that were well-intentioned, designed by smart people, executed well, that really missed the mark, that really did actually not connect people with the resources they needed. So people remained food insecure or unstably housed. And that is kind of a tragedy, right? I think we can do better. And I've spent a lot of time, as many other people have, thinking about how to do better. And the systems by design thinking framework that I'm going to turn to next is a way of really creating a new way of thinking about systems thinking and design thinking that can help us combine what is the ecosystem for the people and what is their perspective, so that we can actually get more people connected to resources. The 3 stories that I'm going to tell you all come from rather lengthy peer-reviewed journals, so they're backed up by a lot of evidence, but they're also just wonderful stories. The first one is about a housing program for people who had diabetes in New Haven. And one of the things that I love about this paper is that the title is a quote from one of the participants. Then I found housing and everything changed. One of the things that changed is the person, I don't think this is her real name, Regina, who's profiled in the piece, who went from having uncontrolled diabetes to controlled diabetes when she got her first permanent place to live in her 40s. So she had been homeless, couch surfing for many, many years. So you might ask yourself, well, wait a second, how does housing help control diabetes? And there are actually several factors. One of them is just the stability of knowing you're going to have a place to live means you're less stressed. You can think about something beyond tonight. You can think longer term. You can think about, how am I going to manage my diabetes? You can actually manage your diabetes because you have a refrigerator to store your insulin. You can get to the grocery store. You can buy healthy food. You can prepare it. You can be on a schedule. You can take your meds when you're supposed to. And so I think this is a really nice example of creating a new ecosystem for Regina and the other people in this study that really made a difference in her health. And I think one of the things that I connect this to in terms of systems thinking is this wasn't a one-time intervention where the study ends, the researchers go away, and everything goes back to normal. This is a permanent shift for Regina and the other people. The next one, also a title taken from a quote, which is another indication, I think, of people who are really thinking from the perspective of the participants, which I absolutely love. When someone cares about you, it's priceless. This one relates to the neighborhood pathway. And I'm going to take a minute just to explain the context because I think it'll help understand and really appreciate the intervention and why it was so effective. This was an intervention that was created by Moves to Opportunity, which is a program based at Harvard. And the whole purpose of this, well, I don't know if the whole purpose, but one purpose of this program is to help people move to those higher opportunity neighborhoods I was talking about, where the kids can go outside and play and be safe and have a good time and run around. The particular program that they did the study on was in Seattle, Kings County. And to set the stage, the baseline for people who get housing vouchers, and housing vouchers really make up the difference between market rent and that 30% I was talking about earlier, only between 10 and 15% of the people who get vouchers end up moving to a higher opportunity neighborhood. You think, well, why is that? Well, good question. So the researchers spent a lot of time really trying to understand why that is. The first thing that they did is they used a framework called administrative burden, which has a long history that I won't go into detail about, but it has 3 components of administrative burden. And this is the administrative burden for people who are trying to get safety net benefits, or really for any of us trying to get anything. The first one is compliance. So there's a million rules and regulations and forms require other forms. There's learning, that I even know that I was eligible for something. And then there's psychological. And there's a lot of literature in the SDOH studies that shows people may know about and be capable of trying to access benefits that they're eligible for, but they don't. And one of the reasons is somebody else needs it more, or I'm ashamed. I don't want to admit that I can't feed my kids. All, again, perfectly understandable reasons. So in this study, they took those 3 pillars and they used that to construct their interviews with people who are going to be getting housing vouchers to understand, well, what might it take? How might we help you move to a higher opportunity neighborhood? And their starting point was they didn't have like a big formal questionnaire. They said, tell me your story. So they heard a lot of stories, and out of that they designed this one-on-one navigator program. And the navigators were trained to address the compliance, the learning, and the psychological burdens. They worked with people throughout the entire process. And by the way, it's an extremely lengthy and tedious process. It's a long paper, and 5 pages of this single-space paper is basically a list of all of the barriers that people encounter when they are trying to use their housing voucher. It's really daunting. So they worked with the people who were getting the vouchers, and I'm going to show you a couple of the tools that they used. They also worked with landlords, because it turns out one of the barriers is upstream. With landlords, they're like, yeah, I don't actually want to rent to people with vouchers. I heard it's a bad thing. And so thinking about, again, that system that's surrounding the people and intervening there was part of it. The end result was that instead of 10 or 15% moving to higher opportunities neighborhoods, 53%. Huge increase. I mean, that is really an out-of-the-park increase and really impressive. And again, there are layers of reasons that happens. Some of it is, yeah, sure, if you're trying to navigate the housing voucher system for the first time, it's pretty daunting. If someone's helping you that understands it, it's less daunting. But a big part of it was also helping people believe that they deserved and actually could have higher opportunity, which is something that they found many people just sort of gave up. Like, I just go to take the first thing I can because I don't really know if I can do any better. And by showing them that they could, it turned out that they did. And that's another example, I think, of something that's going to persist beyond the intervention. Once someone feels more confident and has a greater sense of what they could do, I don't think that's something that you lose. So here are 2 tools that they used. Journey map. I'm sure you've all seen 100 journey maps. But I love the fact that they actually created this journey map, and the dark blue circles are all the intervention points, of which there are a lot. They also created this version of a map, the top part, where you can see basically white boxes, get an apartment, grab it, versus the bottom part, which is the intervention, and that shows, again, all of the different ways and the different levels that this intervention helped people move to higher opportunity neighborhoods. Finally, this is a program that was conducted in Houston in permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is a specialized form of housing for people who have been chronically homeless and have 1 or more disabilities. And in addition to finding them permanent housing, there is support on site, caseworkers and so on. This was an explicitly human-centered design intervention, and they worked with 80-something residents at permanent supportive housing throughout the process. So similar to the last one, they listened to them to understand what their barriers were, what their journeys looked like, and they also designed the intervention with them. They found that almost 2/3 of the people that they talked to in the housing were food insecure. And food insecure means I either ran out of food last month, or I was worried that I was going to run out of food. Not a great place to be, even though they're at this point stably housed in affordable housing. So thinking about, well, what do they need? There's food around them. What's happening? It turned out that they needed some really basic things, like the quote here. I needed to be reminded how to slice avocados and tomatoes. I haven't done that in 2 years. I've been trying to survive. All the way up to I need kitchen appliances. I've forgotten how to cook. I need access to healthy foods. People had social anxiety and they didn't want to go to the grocery store. But the big finding that surprised the researchers was people wanted community. They wanted to do this together. And so that's what they created. They had cooking classes together, they had nutrition education together. There's a really cute picture of them all going to the grocery store together, and then they created this cookbook. And these pictures are actual residents, I assume, holding food that they've prepared, which looks pretty good, for the community in their cooking classes. So I think, again, we see that creating this new ecosystem, giving people new knowledge, new skills, new confidence, is an intervention that goes beyond just helping those people in this housing. So what do we take away from this? Systems by design thinking is mixed. I mean, it can be extremely effective, as we've seen. Those are incredible results. It improves health equity. I didn't go into detail, but typically these social barriers to health have a disproportionate impact on people who are not of the majority group, whatever demographic that may be. But it's also time-consuming and labor-intensive. You can probably imagine. And you saw the map of the Seattle Moves to Opportunity program. All those blue boxes, blue bubbles, were all intervention points. And that is not a core competency for healthcare organizations. And the things that go behind it, like listening, power sharing, those are also not core competencies. But I think these examples show that it's critical. And if you don't do that, you go back to where I started, which is programs that aren't really accomplishing all that much, despite the expenditure of a lot of time and energy and goodwill and resources. So where does that leave us? Healthcare is certainly one of the more intractable systems out there, but nevertheless, people in this room and people outside the room with similar beliefs, maybe we can do something about it. So I have a challenge for you. And I was talking to Chris about what happens next. I would love to add this challenge to the what happens next. So I think everybody in this room gets it and understands systems thinking and design thinking and how they interweave. But how can we take that out to a broader audience? How can we develop and replicate and scale tools and confidence so that more healthcare organizations can do more of this and help people get healthier? That's the question. I would love to hear from any of you who want to continue this discussion or have the answer to my question. My contact information is up there, and I'm sure Chris will also be sending it around. And finally, as I mentioned, there is a list of resources in the slides. There's a lot of information out there. There are thousands of articles about social drivers of health. These are the ones that I specifically used for this presentation. But if you're interested in more examples, I'm happy to share. So I want to thank you all for listening and thinking and being challenged. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the next presentation because Claudia is one of my SDOH heroes. Thank you very much.